The ballroom of a Manhattan skyscraper glittered with chandeliers and champagne flutes, but beneath the golden light, cruelty simmered. At the center of the room, a woman in her mid-40s, tall, poised, dressed in a simple ivory gown, stood frozen as laughter cut through the music. She had just stumbled after being shoved, red wine spilling across her dress like blood blooming on snow. "Oh my God, how clumsy," sneered a silver-haired hostess, her voice dripping venom. "This is exactly why your kind doesn't belong here." The crowd erupted, wealthy heirs and socialites treating her humiliation as entertainment. Phones shot up, capturing the spectacle for Instagram stories. No one knew her name. No one cared. To them, she was nothing. Yet as she steadied herself, her eyes carried a calm so sharp it pierced the air, an omen the night was far from over. She felt the sting of 100 eyes slicing into her skin, not with fists, but with derision. The socialites whispered, their pearls glinting as cruel words rolled off their lips like poisoned honey. A man in a tuxedo laughed, raising his glass as if to toast her disgrace. Someone muttered, security should drag her out before she breaks something of value. And yet, the woman did not lash out. She drew a slow breath, straightened her stained gown, and stood taller than the marble columns surrounding her. She knew this moment would define not her weakness, but their character. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Dignity is a crown no one can take unless you hand it over. So she held her silence, not out of defeat, but because the perfect time for truth had not yet arrived. While the laughter continued, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. A hush crept in, subtle but undeniable, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. The woman's eyes swept the room, meeting smirks with a gaze so steady it forced some to glance away. She clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, and for the first time, a tremor of unease rippled among the crowd. It wasn't anger in her face, it was something colder, something dangerous. Composure sharpened into a blade. The cruel hosts thought they had won, that they had reduced her to nothing but a spectacle. But in truth, they had just triggered the most expensive mistake of their lives. The woman, Elena Carter, 45 years old, founder of a multi-billion-dollar empire, was about to remind them that arrogance has a price, and theirs was coming due. The insults came faster now, sharp as daggers cloaked in laughter. A young man in a tailored tuxedo, clearly drunk but confident in his entitlement, lifted his phone and sneered. "Smile for the camera, sweetheart. This is going viral tonight," his friends roared, delighted by the cruelty. A woman draped in diamonds leaned closer to another guest and whispered, loud enough for Elena to hear, "It's pathetic, isn't it?" Thinking she belongs here, each word was another stone thrown, and the room had become a coliseum where mockery was sport. Elena's dress clung wet against her skin, her heels still sticky with spilled wine, but her dignity held like steel beneath fire. They wanted to see her crumble. Instead, she lifted her chin, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable truth. They were not laughing at weakness, but revealing their own. The hostess, Eleanor Whitmore, 61 years old and infamous for her ruthless social reign, stepped forward with theatrical disdain. Her voice carried across the marble hall. "This isn't a shelter, and we don't serve charity cases." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Guests shifted like predators circling prey, hungry for more humiliation. Elena could feel the weight of their stares pressing against her, as if her very existence was an offense. But her silence was not weakness, it was control. Each cruel word, each dismissive glance became fuel in the furnace of her resolve. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the polished exterior of a business titan, the child who once survived hunger and rejection stirred. She knew how to endure storms. What Eleanor didn't know, what none of them realized, was that storms have a way of striking back with thunder. Carter Whitmore, Eleanor's son, swaggered into the circle of mockery like a performer basking in applause. "Hey, if she's looking for work, the bathrooms could use a scrub," he shouted, doubling over with laughter at his own cruelty. His friends clinked glasses in approval, and even strangers joined in the smirking chorus. Elena felt the sting of their words, but she refused to let it break her. Instead, she let her silence deepen, becoming more dangerous with each heartbeat. She adjusted her gown, her hands steady despite the tremor of humiliation burning in her chest. Around her, The laughter grew, but so did the unease. For a few guests, the sight of her unshaken dignity was unsettling. They couldn't name it, but they felt it. The sense that this was no ordinary woman, that the night was about to turn. The laughter still echoed, but Elena no longer heard it as cruelty. It became background noise, the desperate cackling of those too weak to see their own reflection. She steadied herself, fingers brushing the crimson stain on her gown, then straightened her spine as if the weight of their hatred was nothing but air. A hush fell over a few onlookers, though they didn't understand why. Something in her gaze unsettled them. It wasn't shame, it wasn't fear. It was composure, sharpened into power. Elena remembered her grandmother's words, carved deep into memory. Don't argue with fools. Let your silence be the rope they use to hang themselves. And so she stood still, dignified, while the Whitmores dug their own grave with every jeer. In that poised defiance, Elena shifted the atmosphere without speaking a single word. Instead of shrinking, she began to move slowly, deliberately across the ballroom floor. Every step was measured, her heels clicking softly against marble like a clock counting down to something inevitable. Eyes followed, some out of mockery, others with a growing sense of unease. She passed clusters of guests who had laughed moments earlier, but her calm presence forced their voices lower. The mockery had begun to sound brittle, less confident, as if their cruelty was starting to choke them. Eleanor scoffed, waving her jeweled hand dismissively, but even she felt the shift. Elena reached for a glass of water from the bar. The bartender hesitated, glancing at Eleanor, then reluctantly placed it down. Elena sipped, unbothered by the stares. She had reclaimed control, not with power displayed, but with dignity so unyielding it unsettled the very ground they stood on. As she placed the glass back on the counter, Elena finally spoke, her voice calm yet resonant, slicing through the chatter like a violin note in silence. It's easy to laugh at someone you think is powerless, she said, her eyes locking with Eleanor's power. But character isn't shown when you mock the weak, it's shown in how you treat them. For a heartbeat, the room stilled. Some scoffed, rolling their eyes, but others blinked, suddenly uncomfortable. The words hit deeper than they cared to admit. Eleanor smirked, disguising unease with cruelty. You'll never understand character. You don't belong here. Elena didn't argue. She didn't need to. Because at that very moment, in the pocket of her gown, her phone buzzed with a notification that would flip the balance of power forever. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here. The vibration in Elena's pocket was not just another text, it was the trigger. She glanced at the glowing screen, a secure message from her legal counsel, confirming the $8 billion Whitmore merger contracts were finalized and awaiting her approval. For a moment, she let the phone rest in her hand, its glow illuminating the red stain on her gown. Around her, laughter sputtered, still confident, still blind. But a few guests noticed her calm, noticed the faint smile tugging at her lips. They whispered, uneasy. Eleanor rolled her eyes. What could she possibly be checking? A bus schedule? The crowd laughed again, but the joke rang hollow. Elena lifted the phone to her ear, her voice carrying through the ballroom with deliberate clarity. Yes, this is Elena Carter. Confirm the documents are ready. Good. Then hear me carefully. The words were ordinary. Yet the tone was not. Guests closest to her paused, exchanging confused glances. Elena Carter? Someone whispered. The name rippled like electricity through the crowd, faint recognition flickering in a handful of faces. Carter Whitmore scoffed drunkenly. Oh, please, she's nobody. But even his smirk faltered when he noticed the sudden hush. Elena spoke into the phone again, her voice cold, precise, a scalpel cutting through marble. Cancel the announcement. Effective immediately, terminate all pending agreements with Whitmore Enterprises. Silence detonated across the ballroom. No one moved. No one laughed. Some guests lowered their phones, realizing this was no act. A few began to pale, connecting dots they didn't want to believe. And still, Eleanor sneered, her ignorance shielding her from the truth. Terminate what agreements? She mocked. Elena turned slowly, eyes blazing. Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a gavel. The $8 billion merger deal, The one meant to save your family's failing empire? Consider it gone. A collective gasp surged through the room, sweeping the arrogance out of the air. Harrison Whitmore, the patriarch, pushed forward, his face draining of color. "Wait, what did you say your name was?" His voice cracked, brittle with dread. Elena reached into her clutch and pulled out a single business card, sleek black metal etched with platinum letters. Elena Carter, founder and CEO, Apex Global. She handed it to him with steady hands. The glass slipped from Harrison's grip and shattered, its echo reverberating like a death knell. The ballroom fell into suffocating silence. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed was the one holding their future in her hand. The ballroom, moments ago buzzing with smug laughter, now drowned in silence so deep you could hear the hum of the chandeliers. Harrison's trembling fingers clenched the black metal card as though it might burn him. Guests whispered her name, Elena Carter, each repetition tightening the noose around the Whitmore family. Eleanor's scoff faltered into a half-choke, her mask of superiority cracking for the first time. Carter Whitmore staggered, his drunken arrogance evaporating into panic. Blair, their daughter, stopped recording, her phone slipping in her hand as the truth curdled in her stomach. Elena stood in the center, calm as marble, watching the empire of arrogance collapse under its own weight. "You thought I was invisible," she said softly, but the quiet power in her voice struck louder than any shout. "Now you see me, and what you see is the end of you." Harrison tried to regain control, his voice trembling with desperation. "Miss Carter, this must be a mistake. If we had only known." Elena cut him off, her tone colder than the Manhattan winter outside. "You knew I was a human being. That should have been enough." Gasps rippled through the room. For the first time, the Whitmores looked small, fragile, even in the grand expanse of their own ballroom. Around them, the guests began shifting uneasily, some glancing toward the exits, others clutching their phones with clammy hands. They weren't worried for the Whitmores anymore. They were terrified of their own faces, captured laughing in the background, now evidence of complicity. The cruelty that had bonded them minutes ago had become poison in their veins. Elena didn't need to raise her voice. Reality itself was